Senior Biden administration officials have been busy going to Saudi Arabia, reportedly working on a big Saudi-Israeli deal while curtailing Saudi-China relations. How far and bumpy may the process be? And the U.S. House of Representatives approves a bill to reinterpret a UN resolution on who can represent China at the United Nations. Nice try, but will it work? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor to U.S. President Joe Biden, traveled to Saudi Arabia on July the 27th to meet with Prime Minister and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. This is Sullivan's second trip to the kingdom in less than 3 months, while U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also visited the country in June. According to a White House readout, both sides discussed bilateral and regional matters, including initiatives to advance a common vision for a more peaceful, secure, prosperous and stable Middle East region interconnected with the world. Now, the discussions are said to be exploratory talks for a possible U.S.-Saudi security pact that will facilitate the normalization of ties between Israel and Saudi Arabia, although any deal would be complex and time-consuming if possible at all. Is the Biden administration racing to make a splash in the Middle East before re-election campaign starts? Is this part of an effort to curtail South-China relations, which have been on the rise? And how realistic is such a deal at this moment? For more details, I'm pleased to be joined from Beijing by Zhao, Director of International Political Studies at the National Institute for Global Strategy. From North Carolina, the U.S., by Klaus, Larres, Professor of History and International Affairs at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, by geopolitical researcher Salman al-Ansari. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us, especially for our guest in America and Saudi Arabia. Let me go to Zhao first. First of all, as I said, senior U.S. officials have been busy going to Saudi Arabia. What exactly is on the agenda? Are the media reports credible that they are holding exploratory talks on a possible big deal that may see Israel and Saudi Arabia having a rapprochement?
Yeah, the top U.S. officials has been frequent visit to Saudi Arabia for multiple reasons. One of the most important reasons, of course, you mentioned is the possible breakthrough of establishing or normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. That's what the United States wanted, and that's Biden's administration's top priority before the election. As you mentioned, if they can accomplish this, that will be one of the major diplomatic success in the Middle East, and showing that the U.S. still remain as a major actor in the region. Now, if you remember, Sullivan gave a very important speech in early May, and he pointed out that the U.S. Still want to play a major role and want to enhance relationship with Gulf states, and particularly Saudi Arabia is at the center of the U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. He stated that the U.S. still want to get involved and want to push diplomacy as well as deterrence in the region. Of course, diplomacy refers to this relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and deterrence means that the new alliance should again continue to deter Iran and Iran's ambition to achieve nuclear power. So at this point, I think the overall strategy of the U.S. in the region is still trying to continue to isolate Iran and trying to push reconciliation between Israel and other Arab states. But the problem is, of course, Russia and China still have very strong ties in the region, and China's influence is increasing in the region. So on the surface, U.S. is saying, oh, it's about bilateral relations, it's not about China. But essentially, because China has recently brokered a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the U.S. now has this sense of urgency to try to push forward and move more resources into Middle East and trying to break the deal to show their presence.
Okay. Well, let me go to our guest in the Middle East now, Mr. al-Ansari. What is the talk of town at this moment? What is your or the Saudi perception of the goals on the mind of the U.S. officials?
Yeah, thank you so much, Xi. And I actually agree totally with your honorable guest, and he actually took the words that I actually wanted to say. And as far as we all know that the Biden administration did a lot of damage to the historic and strategic relations with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Saudis stood firm and pursued their interests decisively, and they positioned themselves in the center of global politics at this changing world's order, that's for sure. Furthermore, Riyadh has shown to the US and the world that its sovereignty is a red line that cannot be crossed in any circumstances. And if the United States is looking for a client state, then they should not think of the kingdom at all whatsoever. And to answer your question, I think the US has three reasons to wanting to warm its relations with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. One is that they realized that they made a big mistake when they called Saudi Arabia a pariah, when they wanted to isolate Saudi Arabia, which is the heart of the Arab and Muslim world. And right now they want to rectify the trajectory of this indispensable relations. Second is because definitely of the presidential elections, and the Biden administration is trying to score a big win in the Middle East, because that's going to be like the one and only legacy that they would be having in foreign policy. Third is definitely to circumvent, and better say, to avoid losing the most important nation in the Arab and Muslim world. And there are no official reports actually with regards to, like from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with regards to the nature of agreements that have been discussed with the United States. But I can assure you two things. One, that it's a complete wishful thinking to propose a Saudi-Israeli normalization for free. It's going to be a wishful thinking. Nothing's going to be for free. The price tag will be centered on giving the Palestinians their rights to self-determination, and for the two United Nations Security Council's accord to be completely applied and enacted. Second is that I believe that Saudi Arabia is definitely flexible on a multitude of things, and the Palestinian cause is not one of them, because it's purely a humanitarian cause that needs to be rectified. And with regards to the overall, I think like the thing with Israel right now, as you know, that the Arab governments are moving right now towards being more moderate than ever, while the Israeli government is going to the opposite side, unfortunately. And actually, Thomas Friedman, the New York Times columnist, he has said it beautifully. He said the far-right Israeli government has one of two options. One, to continue the annexation of the West Bank, or having normalization with Saudi Arabia and the wider Muslim world. And they can't have it both ways. That's what he said. So I think what he said is really true, and that's what we believe in.
Okay. Professor Larres, what is your engagement of the kind of deal that's being weighed between the United States and Saudi Arabia? First of all, it's an ambitious deal. How can the Biden administration expect that this deal could materialize in the short time that is still left between the re-election campaign starts, and the difficulties that it may face in trying to realize any deal of such kind?
It certainly is a very ambitious deal indeed, and I think the Biden administration is fully aware of that. That is one reason why Jake Sullivan is going to travel to Saudi Arabia 3 times when he comes to the next meeting about the peace talks in Saudi Arabia in a week's time. I think we clearly see a reconciliation between the United States and Saudi Arabia. It is, of course, not correct that it's all the American fault that Saudi Arabia-American relations were not good in the recent past. We know about the very controversial murder of Washington Post journalist Khashoggi that has isolated Saudi Arabia in the entire world. And now Saudi Arabia is making a strenuous effort to overcome that. And the Biden administration is also prepared to overcome that and to move towards Saudi Arabia. One of the reasons clearly is to get a deal done between Saudi Arabia and Israel. It is clear that the hardline Israeli government led by Netanyahu will find it very difficult to make concessions on the Palestinian issue. Biden knows that such a deal doesn't come for free. Of course not. Saudi Arabia will demand concessions regarding the Palestinians, but also perhaps about the development of civilian nuclear weapons in Saudi Arabia, which is also highly controversial. And apart from Saudi Arabia, no one else in the Middle East actually supports that, and neither does the Biden administration, many other countries around the world. So this is all very, very difficult. But it is a good sign that the United States is joining the call of Saudi Arabia to talk about Russia and Ukraine in a week's time. Saudi Arabia is trying to set itself up as a mediator in an international war, and it is part of its efforts to improve its image in the world. Also, the Saudi interest in terminating the war against Yemen, that very brutal war which Saudi Arabia has led against Yemen. There's a peace, an armistice at work right now, but of course we still want to see a permanent peace. And all that Saudi Arabia is prepared to be flexible about, and that is supported by the Biden administration. I would not agree with my Chinese colleagues, so I agree with most of what you said, but I wouldn't agree that it's mostly about China or luring Saudi Arabia away from China. That might be a side effect, but I think it's more about Russia, that Saudi Arabia is not moving closer into the Russian camp, but is moving away from its neutral position in the Russian-Ukrainian war towards the Western side, towards the American-Ukrainian side.
Right.
And I think that's one of the uttermost goals of Jake Sullivan when he comes to Saudi Arabia next week.
Mr. Zhao, your reaction, if you have any, and also how sincere is the United States in trying to broker a deal, giving all the kind of objectives that it wants to achieve, the re-election or curtailing China-Saudi relations and mending ties. How much of the U.S. effort is really for the region, for the Palestinian people, for instance, for the normalization of Israel's relationship with Arab countries in the region?
Yeah. Oh, well, first of all, Jake Sullivan made it very clear that, just last October, the U.S. published its new national security report. And in that, he said that the most important thing in the next so-called decisive decade is the geopolitical competition with China. So the U.S. is actually seeing the world through the lens of this geopolitical competition. It's very hard to say that, at this point, any U.S. policy has nothing to do with China. I'm not saying that any decision by the U.S. in the Middle East is absolutely about China, but China is always in the background, and this competition, particularly the competition of influence in the Middle East and in the larger Muslim world, is ongoing. So I would say, Sullivan must bear this in mind.
Sorry for interrupting. The time is
again,
How sincere do you think the U.S. really is?
So based on that, I think on the one hand, America is sincere on behalf of Israel, wanted to, really have a reconciliation between Israel and other countries to make peace in the region. However, on the other hand, from the point of view of the Palestinian people, it's not sincere at all, because the U.S. has never made enough effort to push forward to safeguard the rights of the Palestinian people and try to push forward with, under UN Security Council resolution.
Mr. al-Ansari, a question from the perspective of Saudi Arabia, because it is written in that opinion piece you mentioned that Saudi Arabia possibly wants from the U.S. a NATO-level mutual security treaty, a civilian nuclear program, which was mentioned, and the purchase of more advanced weapons. Is that what Saudi Arabia wants from the United States? Would they trade or compromise their relationship with their biggest trading partner, which is China, for a better relationship with the United States?
Yeah, I think the United States understood.
And keep it short, please. I have limited amount of time.
The United States, I think, understood that the Saudis will never be a client state in the way they want them to be. They're going to be a sovereign nation that will have multiple relations with everyone. China is the biggest trading partner for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the biggest trading partner of 130 countries in the world, including the United States itself. With regards to your question, there are three things, as you said, but they have not been mentioned by the government of Saudi Arabia, all about leaks in the media, in the US media, a security alliance, nuclear cooperation, and a two-state solution for the Palestinians. These are the three major things that the kingdom would love to see materialize for the whole normalization thing to continue.
All right, we are going to leave it there. A very contentious issue for sure, but time is very limited. Thank you to Zhao, Director of International Political Studies at the National Institute for Global Strategies, Klaus Larres, Professor of History of International Affairs at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Salman al-Ansari, geopolitical researcher, joining us from Riyadh. When we come back, the U.S. House of Representatives last week passed a bill to reinterpret a 1971 UN resolution concerning China. Have they got nothing better to do? Stay tuned.